Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us at this regular meeting of the Madera City Council, a regular meeting of the Madera Public Financing Authority Board, a special meeting of the Madera City Council as the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, a special meeting of the Madera City Council as the successor agency to the former Madera Redevelopment Agency, and a special meeting of the Housing Authority. If we can have roll call, please.
Mayor Commissioner Andrew Medellin.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Commissioner Steve Montes.
Here.
Councilmember Chairperson Cecilia Foley Gallegos.
Here.
Councilmember Vice Chairperson Jose Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember Commissioner Derek Robinson Sr.
Present.
Councilmember Commissioner Santos Garcia.
Here.
Councilmember Commissioner Donald Hawley.
Present.
Thank you very much, Claudia. If you will welcome the birthday boy from Valley West Christian Center, who just turned 29 recently, he will lead us in the invocation. If you'll stand, please.
I noticed that there were some other barnacles out here in the audience too as well. Thank you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you tonight that as we come to ask your blessing over this city council meeting, Psalms chapter 150 and verse number 6 says, "Let everything that hath breath praise the Lord." And then it ends with praise the Lord. I thank you, Lord, that we have breath tonight, and we have breath to give life to our city. I pray that each and every one that as we have gathered together will have that business in mind, that as we breathe over this city, we breathe over it with life and full of your goodness and full of your glory. We ask your blessing on this meeting tonight, and we pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you.
Pastor Leach, if you'll join me in the pledge, please. Ready, salute. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will now take a short recess from all the aforementioned meetings except for the Housing Authority. So I will now pass the gavel over to the Chair of the Housing Authority to conduct that item, Chairwoman Ceci Gallegos.
Thank you, Mayor Medellin. This is a special meeting of the Housing Authority of the City of Madera. I call this meeting to order, and I will just move on to approval of the agenda. So if one of my colleagues would like.
Chair, I move to adopt the agenda as presented. Second.
I have a first and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, motion passes. Public comment. Members of the public shall have an opportunity to address the board regarding matters on this agenda. Only matters regarding the Housing Authority. If it's public comment for the city council meeting, hold those items till then.
Hi, everybody. Ron Montoya, live in Madera. I had an opportunity to sit in the workshop with Ron Manfredi, and after listening, I quote, he called Andy Medellin articulate. And then after reviewing his contract, I was like, no wonder he's praising him, articulate. It was just a windfall of compliments about his family, and I was reviewing the contract. It's like, isn't there a conflict of interest? His contract, Ron Manfredi, has Andy Medellin's signature. And then you review the contract. I hope he didn't get paid $1,500 to spiel that nonsense. Mr. Medellin, could you articulate if you're still a member of the golf course? Mr. Medellin, could you articulate if you still owe $96,903 in tax liens? Mr. Medellin, could you join me?
Mr. Montoya?
Yes, ma'am.
I apologize for
Sure.
interrupting, but I'm not sure if we were clear. Right now, the public comment is only about one agenda item, that's C1 on the Housing Authority.
Okay.
And there will be public comment. If you want to finish, but that'll be considered your city public comment, so you don't get to do
That's
it
okay.
twice.
Give me 10 more seconds. Mr. Medellin, could you come sit with me and just, while everybody pays their water bill over here on a Friday afternoon, and just sit with me and watch how many people you've affected by your water rates. It's sad, and most of these people speak Spanish. Thank you, my friend.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to give comment? If not, I close public comment at this time. Moving on. Just for housing, just for housing. Moving on to presentations, we don't have a workshop or anything on the consent calendar, so I'll move on to C1, consideration and adoption of a resolution number 1136, approving agreements with consultant services between the Housing Authority and the City of Madera and Benjamin Development Services. Ms. Bomprezi.
Okay, as you know, around August 9th, our executive director went on administrative leave and resigned from her employment, which has left a void in our agency. And we would like to contract with Benjamin Development Services, Nick Benjamin, to assist the Housing Authority and myself in getting some things accomplished there are some things that really need to be done ASAP, like the capital funds, because we were supposed to obligate by the 15th. And now we're past that, so every month that we go without obligating those capital fund money for 2017, we lose 1/12 of future funding. For 2018, that could be up to $57,000. For 2019, it could be almost $60,000. So we have a product ready to go, but I'm in the middle of audit submission for unaudited financial statements, and I just need some assistance in getting some of these things done. Some of the things he's going to be doing is reviewing our maintenance department and the operations there, and we're going to come up a recommendation to fill that position, and we think we have we'll get a good solution to that. He's going to help with preparing agendas and resolutions, work on projects that we have that he certainly has the knowledge for, since he spent 7 years at our housing authority. And his services are not to exceed 20 hours, and the cost will be $150 an hour plus some trip. I don't estimate the fiscal impact. I've projected it out to all the way to the end of November. My goal is to have all three positions that we have available filled before that time, and we're already working on some things, and we'll bring back to the next board meeting. So with that, I'll entertain any questions. If not, I would love to have your approval so that we can bring him on board.
Perfect. I bring it back to my colleagues. Any questions, gentlemen? Mayor Medillan?
Thank you, Sally, for that. Just for clarification, when you said 20 hours, is that 20 hours max or per week or
Per week, I'm sorry.
Okay, I just want to get that on
No more
record.
than 20 hours per week, and he's probably not, we can probably do a lot of it via email and phone calls. He is going to spend some time in the office, just kind of get
Sure.
acclimated, but I don't anticipate, I anticipate a lot of his time is going to be out in the field.
Well, I agree with you. Mr. Benjamin certainly has the experience, and he was with us previously for 7 years, so I'm in support of that. But I just want to kind of go back to what you had touched on about the funding. What were the dates again? Our back's up against the wall
Right,
for this
so
funding, and what are those
August
dates?
15th, the 2017 CAP funds were supposed to be obligated. We've only obligated 110,000, which we moved some money to operations, and we need to get the remainder of that obligated. 2018 now, we're up against that because we only have one more year. So a year from August 15th, we have to obligate the 2018 fund, and that's even higher than the 2017. So we have 2 years when we get the funding to obligate, and then we have an additional 2 years to spend the money but they have to be obligated. That means they have to go out to bid. We have to have the contractor in place. We have to have the agreements, the contracts, and everything signed in order to obligate. The work still can take 2 years to do.
As long as we go through that process and meet that demand. And so, since the August 15th has passed and we lose that 1/12, as each month goes by, are we losing any more, or that's the hard cut?
1/12 each month it goes by that it doesn't get obligated. So if we don't obligate and have a contract in place by September 15th, we will lose 1/12. October 15th, it'll be 2/12. So
Okay.
our hopes is to get it obligated, and we're already working on getting it out to bid. It's ready to go. The project is ready to go.
So that's what you mean by the 112. So that 1 month is the
Yeah,
12th.
yeah.
So we'll lose the second
Yeah.
month of that if we don't. Well, just, and I know you have a lot on your plate, and I know Mr. Benjamin can help with this. Even with the audit, we need to make sure that we do not skip another month. That by September 15th, it's my recommendation that we prioritize and make sure that we do not lose any more money at the Housing Authority. We certainly can't afford to do that.
Actually, I'm ready to submit the unaudited. It's ready to go.
Fantastic, fantastic. I have no further questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Garcia.
I just have a statement. I think we have a sense of urgency here.
Yes.
And I think that we need to move forward. I would ask my colleagues to do so.
Okay. Are there any other questions from my colleagues? Ms. Montoya, do I need to bring it for public comment, or can I go for a vote?
You already
Okay, sounds good.
asked for public comment.
I need a motion.
With that,
So moved to
Madam
approve.
Chair, I move to approve item C1 as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Monprezi. I'm going to hold council reports to City Council, so at this time, I would like to adjourn the Housing Authority. Thank you. I'll hand the gavel over to Mayor Medellin.
Symbolically, yeah.
It's not all sweaty, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, if everybody's back in place, we will move back into the City Council portion of the meetings, beginning with the approval of the agenda. It's been called to my attention, there's a few items, ladies and gentlemen, as well as my colleagues, that I would like to refer back to staff. And those particular items are item F1. Item F1 is the project labor agreement discussion. Also, item C3. This is a consideration of the two resolutions approving the revised Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, the reallocations. And also item E1. Item E1 is a discussion about the CFD 2006-01. It's a follow-up. I believe there's some additional information that has not been confirmed yet, so my apologies if you're here for those particular items. It would be my recommendation that we pull those items from the agenda. Is there any other item or change to the agenda that my colleagues would like to introduce? Seeing none, I will call for action on approval of the agenda with the removal of those three items.
So move to approve with the necessary corrections.
Second. It's been properly moved and seconded to approve the agenda with those three deletions. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Motion carries. Moving into the public comment portion of the City Council. The first 15 minutes of the meeting are reserved for members of the public to address the council on items which are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speakers shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers will be asked, but are not required, to identify themselves and state the subject of their comment. If the subject is an item on the agenda, the mayor has the option of asking the speaker to hold the comment until that item is called. Comments on items listed as a public hearing on the agenda should be held until the hearing is opened. The council is prohibited by law from taking any action on matters discussed that are not on the agenda, and no adverse conclusion should be drawn if the council does not respond to public comment at this time. Is there anyone wishing to speak under this definition of public comment? Please come forward and use the podium.
Good evening, council. We're here because we have a property here in Madera that is empty. It's an empty lot that we've had for 15 years, and we've disked it every year to keep it, nice and clean. This year, we did the same exact thing that we've done year after year, and we got charged because the city went out and disked it months after we had done it. So basically,
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt, but I believe you're here for a particular item on our agenda.
Oh,
Is this
No.
for the weed abatement, I'm assuming?
Yes, I'm sorry. I
Okay,
should
no,
have
no,
said
that's quite all right.
Yes, we
But
debate.
we do have this on agendized to discuss, and so when we get to that portion,
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought
No,
we
no.
were able to do that at this time.
well, this is the public comment portion for items that are not on the agenda.
Oh, is it on there? We didn't realize. Okay.
That's quite all right.
So now you guys know.
That's quite all right. No, that's right. No worries at all. Yeah. No, you're welcome. Is there anybody else wishing to speak under this definition of public comment? Please come forward. I have a chair here. You can use this one if you like. No? Don't want to trade with me? Seeing none, I will close the public comment portion and move into our workshop. This workshop, item A1, is Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, the closure of runway 826 project. Report given by Mr. Chris Boyle.
Just one moment, Mayor. It's like somebody deleted my presentation.
See.
The power of the backup.
All right, that's great.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, citizens of the community. Tonight's workshop is indeed a workshop on the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, and specifically the closure of runway 826, which is a component of that plan. I would note that supporting me tonight will be Susan O'Hara of the Finance Department, as well as John Scarborough from our Parks Department, and in support of our Public Works Department. Let's do a little bit of background on the role of an Airport Land Use Commission, or an ALUC, and the document that they adopt, which is the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. I've got a lot of acronyms tonight, so we better define them before I start talking about ALUCs and ALUC plans and the like. The role of the commission is, as stated in the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, is to the fundamental purpose of the ALUC is to promote land use compatibility around airports. Oftentimes, I might substantiate that by also defining that land use compatibility being predicated or attached to a need to make certain that the safety of the public is reflective of the land uses around the airport, as well as the survivability of any pilot if by chance a crash occurs. So inherently, there's a safety component as it relates to land use compatibility around airports. Per that same document, the Airport Land Use Commission is an autonomous agency within the bounds defined by the state law. The decision of the ALUC are final and are independent of the Madera County Board of Supervisors or the city councils of Chowchilla and Madera. The ALUC does not need county or city approval in order to adopt the plan that was adopted in 2015. Now, as it relates to the city is the responsibility for implementing the ALUC adopted Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan rests with the affected local agencies. So as it relates to implementation of that plan and conformance with that plan, that is the responsibility of the city. I'd add, too, that this presentation is a significant iteration of the presentation I made to the Airport Advisory Committee in June. And it's a pleasure still to bring it again to the City Council. Let's look at a project timeline as it relates to the adoption of the 2015 document. There were 2 public workshops held as it related to the adoption of the document. There were public workshops held in August and September of 2015. Those were noticed public workshops, and There was also approval by Caltrans in advance of a formal adoption hearing that was held on September 29, 2015. The ALUC is made up of primarily the Airport Land Use Commission is made up of members of the county's Planning Commission, but there are also two individuals who are appointed to the commission that have airport experience or airport expertise. In terms of the adoption of the document, a technical advisory group was formed that included members of Madera County and both members of the city and the city of Madera, and that included me. And that technical advisory committee met at least 2 times in advance of adoption of the document, where the city was allowed to review the draft document being prepared by Mead and Hunt on behalf of the Airport Land Use Commission, and then provide feedback as related to that. There are components of the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan that clearly demonstrate comments from the city because there were specific approvals that could be altered by the adoption process, and there are 4 specific projects that are spoken to within the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan that essentially protect those entitlements because they had already been entitled in advance of the plan. There was some concern about disclosure and noticing from the Airport Advisory Commission, and so staff took it upon themselves to look to the county and the Airport Land Use Commission to make certain that all required noticing was completed, and all required noticing was completed as related to the aforementioned public workshops and the adoption process. Let's talk a little bit about history now. The 2015 plan replaced the 1993 Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. When you look at this particular document, I wish I could rotate it because this area along here, you might notice the grid is not in a north-south orientation, and the southern extent of the plan is the river. So that in and of itself is a real indicator of how the document's been expanded in terms of its impact areas over time. And but this was the full scope of the Airport Land Use Compatibility plan at that time. Today's plan that supersedes it, although it has very similar boundaries, it's kind of stretched because one of the expectations of the ALUC plan was the extension of the runway over the lifespan of this plan. So when you look at the initial plan, you can see it's a little bit stubby along the airport environs, the Area A, and the extensions of the runway both to the north and the south. And those are stretched out forward because the length of the runway is addressed as a component of the overall Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan moving into the future. So our C zones and the like, which we'll discuss the differentiations between each of those zones, those are more pronounced within the overall plan. Now, how does the plan work? I'm going to pass out to the council members and to senior staff handouts that are specific to the tables and the map before you, so we can kind of take a brief primer on how the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan works and how staff looks to implement the plan as development proposals occur underneath the zones themselves. So the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan starts with a map, but that map delineates specific zones that define the activities that are typical of an airport. The A zone would be the runway protection zone, basically the runway itself and the close environs around it. The inner approach zone would be B1. B2 would be sideline zones. C1 is an outer approach zone that's reflective of traffic coming and going from the airport. And then the primary traffic pattern would be where planes typically are found more prevalently in their approaches and landings in the airport, around the airport. And then finally, D is just other airport environs that are in proximity to the airport. Now, note too within the handout that there are discussions in terms of noise and overflight activities. And then there's also a note in safety and aeronautics, and it talks about where crashes occur, at what percentage is the overall number of crashes found in these particular zones and the like, noting that the purpose of the plan is to talk about safety and make sure safety is reflected in land use. Now, how does that turn into understanding what can or cannot occur in a particular zone? Well, that's translated by the tables that are on the second page that you have there. So as it relates to each of the zones across the top as part of vertical columns are the zones themselves, and then there are color codings in place that say there's compatibility here, there's conditional compatibility, or it's an incompatible use within that particular zone. So where we put residential or commercial or industrial types of activities, where schools go, where schools don't go, and the like, are all determined by the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan and these compatibility tables. And they're born out of the maps that we oftentimes look to and reference. Now let's talk about the ag runway as a component, and then we'll kind of link the handout to the presentation. The ag runway is proposed to be removed from use as a part of the 2015 Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. And note that there are little asterisks within the map itself. This is a zoom up of that map. And those asterisks are there because of the call out that compatibility zones are in effect until such time that runway 826 is closed. The city anticipates to close runway 826, which is restricted to agricultural use, once the FBO lease expires in 2019. Noting that this document's been prepared now for 4 years, the land uses that have been entertained within the Airport Land Use Compatibility Zone boundaries have been reflected at the closure of the runway. Now let's talk about some of those uses. Well, there's 3 primary uses that are either in process or in some cases under construction right now. To the west of the ag runway is Village D. To the east of the runway is the city's fire station, as well as an industrial project known as Full Throttle Suspension. I've noted those as FTS within this particular graphic. Let's first look at the FTS project and the fire station from an aerial perspective. You might note that the runway, the ag runway, ends just off of this particular graphic here, immediately west of these 2 projects. The fire station on the west side of Condor, and the Full Throttle Suspension project, approximately 140,000+ square feet of warehouse, is on the other side of Condor, and they're both impacted by the changes in zones as it relates to the closure of runway 828. So in the case of the airport, note that staff's early analysis of the placement of the fire station was expectant of the closure of the runway. And right now that's a C1 zone prior to closure, but it becomes a D zone with the closure of the runway, which is in other airport environs. And if you look at your compatibility chart, there is a location It's about midway down on one of the pages. It says public facilities. Note that in the D zone, a public facility like a fire station is compatible. It's in the green. Thank you. But it's conditionally compatible if left within the C1 zone. So staff's selection of this property and ultimately its specific placement of the structure on the property such that it avoided the B1, B2 zones that were going to remain in place on the property. So this would be the back page, second page, public safety facilities. You'll note that it's compatible in both the D and the C2 zones, but it's conditionally compatible. And let's note that it says only if a site outside of the zone would not serve the intended function. Staff really didn't look for alternative sites, noting that this site was an ideal site in terms of our response times, noting that the runway would be closed. As it relates to full throttle suspension, it's a similar situation. It's in the D zone if the runway is closed as per the ALUC plan. And it provides for, as I noted, about 150,000 square feet total. There's 121,000 that are currently in plan check with a third building proposed as a second phase. That would include 22 employees at startup and 50 at build-out. And the planning department really likes to steal business from Fresno, and this particular business would be relocating all of its, sorry, city manager, you're not there no more. So we really like to go after these opportunities, and in this particular instance, we're very fortunate to have the full throttle people coming on board here in the city, bringing 50 living wage jobs. Village D is on the other side of the airport, on the west of the airport, and that's in process right now. Staff continues to formulate studies as it prepares for the release of a draft EIR, an administrative draft, in the coming months. We're about to take that to Caltrans, certain components to Caltrans for their comments. That continues to move forward. Ultimately, Village D is about 3 square miles to the west and south of the airport, and includes about 11,000 homes and park spaces and just shy of $2 million of 2 million square feet of commercial office space. And it really is this opportunity for the city to begin to implement a general plan and to build a new Madera consistent with that general plan. And it's consistent with the airport land use compatibility plan, contingent upon the closure of the ag runway. Now, I would note, though, that in this particular instance, much of the residential development would still have been allowed for in the 1993 iteration of the document, but there is some, as you reach into closer into the airport, because the zones have changed over time, there is a reduction in density as you get closer to the airport. But probably 70% of these lands were called out in the 1993 document at being built out at 6 units per acre, and the other, call it 25% with a 5% wiggle room in there. Maybe there isn't, it's too close to the runway for any residential development. There's about 5% right now in the new plan that you can't build residential within. But that was penciled out at 3 units per acre per the 1993 plan. The 2015 plan provides for the proposals that are currently being processed, which would allow for a little greater density overall. But that's pretty atypical of this particular plan. The plan, its findings are that you can place residential uses in closer proximity to the airport today, and that's something that the Airport Land Use Commission ultimately approves. I don't pretend to be an FAA authority as it relates to it, but I am charged, per earlier statements in this workshop, with implementing that plan, and we've done so. So what's the summary in this workshop? The summary would be that adoption of the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan was completed by the ALUC, consistent with all applicable laws, in 2015. I would note that earlier, their actions are final. City staff did not have a role within the actual adoption process, with the exception of having opportunities to work as part of a technical committee and provide comment. The closure of runway has been anticipated since its adoption in 2015 as part of that plan. And we have land use entitlements that now are either in the development stage or are nearing coming to discretionary bodies that have been prepared consistent with these plans. The third point would be the city has been responsible in implementation of the ALUC adopted plan. Any entitlements of development of land around it have been consistent with that adopted 2015 document. And as I noted, ongoing and pending development depends on the runway closure as called out in the plan. That said, that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Chris, for bringing us up to speed and a little history on that. That goes back almost 5 years. Any questions from council? Mayor Pro Tem Montes.
I have a question. You said, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Mr. Boyle, you said that it was, all the meetings were conducted according to applicable law, so they were publicly noticed, like the ones we are in today. Was that something, an obligation that the city had, or was it the ALUC?
No,
process?
as noted, the ALUC is an autonomous body, and noticing would not have been appropriate, nor was it the responsibility of the city to notice. I did go to the county staff and ask them for their noticing information because, well, when someone says, do you know if it's been noticed? And the reality is, I wouldn't know unless I went and sought out that information from county staff that supports ALUC. And so I did do that to confirm some of those concerns. Now, I would add that noticing of countywide or in our case, citywide actions, they're not noticed to specific property owners. They're noticed to the newspapers of record. And so any physical noticing to stakeholders, as I noted in our AAC presentation, wouldn't have occurred within that standard noticing protocol.
Thank you.
Any other questions by council? Yes, Councilman Robinson.
Yes, the advisory board, what was their input?
Well, as I noted, I can't speak to Chowchilla's comments. Different airport, different concerns, and city staff was focused upon the impacts of the ALUC plan as related to existing entitlements. So as an example, at the time, we had a Foxglove apartment complex at Granada and Kennedy. That entitlement was approved at a certain density. We wanted to make certain, because that entitlement was a live entitlement, that it would have the opportunity to build at that density, regardless of the findings of the airport plan. And those findings on those 4 properties were incorporated in the plan. Just one moment. Right here. So I can pass this across the dais if you'd like, but there are 4 little identified locations, Site 1, Site 2, Site 3, and Site 4, that at the time had entitlements in place upon them. So there was concerns from the development community that the airport plan might adversely impact those entitlements. So staff, in working with the ALUC staff and the consultant, brought that to their attention, and ultimately that component was added into the airport land use compatibility plan. In terms of any changes to the overall matrix, we understood that there were going to be changes to the map, and if you, it's very telling in a way in that if you look at this airport land use compatibility map, you'll note that the river is right here, and so on development that's already there, it's there, and so we wanted to make certain that we understood the parameters of what a stretch runway looked like. But in terms of any influence as to what the findings of the Airport Land Use Commission were, or the supporting research that was done by their consulting firm, or the support of the Technical Advisory Board, our focus was largely on what current entitlements were in place.
certainly advantageous in that particular area, Chris. Now that you bring it up, between Granada and Schnorr and 16, there's quite a bit of available land there.
And you
for-
can see how the runway, the anticipated runway extension kind of stretches those zones and alters the type of land uses that are compatible there.
Exactly. Councilman Garcia.
So I heard two things very distinctly. One is that their findings are final, and the city cannot reverse that.
We can't contest or reverse that. Our job is to implement the plan.
I got that. And that the city is in charge of implementing the plan. What is that entitled? What does that mean?
Well, really, when if you using your handout as a reference, any development that comes before the city must be found to be compatible with the airport land use compatibility plan. So an individual may come and have a development question as it relates to a specific parcel, and if their proposal isn't consistent with the table that you have there, if it's found to be non-compatible, then that individual the construction of that use isn't going to be supported by city staff. Two, the yellow zones, the compatibility zones, oftentimes that really impacts what can occur on a property. You may be able to have an office complex, but the actual coverage, the floor area ratios of that parcel may be such that it adversely impacts the ability for that development to really make sense moving forward. So you see the plan shaping the landscape around you based on what can go where, or in some cases, how much of something is appropriate on a particular parcel. And that's all borne out of the compatibility table, the criteria.
So there has been development, there continues to be development, as you noted, facilities being built in anticipation of the closure. Is there any financial responsibilities for the closure of that strip, of that airport strip, to the city?
Can you elaborate on?
Well, I just want to know, we don't have much say in what is happening, other than the public comments, et cetera, but now, once the decision has been made to close the strip,
right,
is the city on the hook for any of that?
As the report, as the plan advises, the leases are expiring at the end of this ag season, which is in the next month or so. And so consequently, once those leases expire, we don't have an obligation to renew those leases, no. So there isn't any adverse financial impact to the city, not in terms of direct financial impact.
Thank you.
Councilman Robinson.
So the city owned the airport and the county owned the land around it,
No. If we're talking about land use, or let's start out with ownership. The city does own its airport and its properties, much like we own our golf course and our city hall structures and the like. It's a city facility. The properties around it are owned by individual property owners, both parcels large and small. The development of those parcels is impacted by the airport land use compatibility plan, such that all development within that plan area must be consistent with that plan.
So the FAA, right? So we're going by their rules also, right?
The FAA must certify the airport land use compatibility plan. So in advance of it going to the Airport Land Use Commission for final adoption, it was certified by the FAA.
So it's already certified.
Yes, about every 20 years, it makes good, prudent sense to go through an airport land use compatibility plan. So you think about 1993 to 2015, city was doing its due diligence, or the Airport Land Use Commission was doing its due diligence and making sure that its planning documents were up to date.
So you won't come back and bite us then?
Pardon me?
You won't come back and bite us in the rear, concerning, the project? For instance, if
at this point in juncture,
rules and regulation.
Councilmember Robinson, the city continues to develop land or process development applications within the airport land use compatibility plan boundaries consistent with that plan.
Okay. Okay, because I heard, some people were saying that we was going over and beyond and rushing the project.
I would say that the city's planning department isn't in the business of rushing projects. It's in the business to make sure that good planning practices occur in the city of Madera.
Just making sure,
Amen.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Montes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Don't want to beat this to death, but so what would be, and I don't know if this is a question for you, what would be a contingency for somebody who utilizes that runway?
Well, we have a primary runway that's not closing, and so the ability of the ag industry to continue to take flights in and out of the airport, it would be shifted onto our primary runway.
So we just move it over.
There's nothing in the plan that says we can no longer utilize the runway as a taxiway to take access to the primary runway. The concern of the ag industry would be that they would be mixing with both private and commercial aviation that already uses the runway. But the ability to take flights out of and into the airport wouldn't be eliminated by the closure of the runway. It would just have to occur on our main runway. We would have to maximize the utility of the main runway.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Rodriguez.
Yes, Chris, I know that the main topic here is the land use compatibility plan with respects to the closure of that runway. But in looking at the map and the legend that you sent out here, when considering B1 and with respects to parks, for example, how does that affect parks? And based on the policies and maps that you presented here, it shows that must have little or no permanent recreational facilities, such as ball fields and what have you. But can I extend to that? And I know that this is regarding the runway, but it still has to do with this airport land use compatibility plan. Could you touch on that?
I've had a lot of experience recently with parks in the airport land use compatibility plan area. And I think maybe I'll read between the lines. If I'm not reading between the lines, let me use the area commonly known as the Pomegranate Park as an example of where parks belong or don't belong. Okay? The Pomegranate Park, as originally approved, you might think of Home Ranch as having been developed just after this plan was adopted. So it was a very fresh document when the subdivision maps for Home Ranch began, and for Cottonwood Estates, once known as Rose Hollow, began to be processed by the city. Conditions of approval of those maps required that this slice, that land south of Cleveland, that wedge right there that we all can see very plainly as we drive by, or from a Google Earth aerial photo, that wedge right there is part of the B1 zone back in 1993. It's substantially, that hasn't changed dramatically since these zones have been stretched in 2015. But in 1993, the utilization of that area for a park would have been significantly very difficult to do. What was allowed in that zone was agricultural uses, except ones attracting birds. Now, parks and playgrounds and things like that were allowed for in the C zone. So the deeding of the land by the owner of that land at that time was not specific to the construction of a park, because a park would have not been a smart utilization of that land. I'm not sure how many people would want to take their children, or in my case, my grandchildren, to a park in an inner approach zone that would account for, number one, it's a little louder because it's where planes are approaching. And also, it has a significant amount of crashes as relates to the overall crashes. Probably not good land use planning to place a park there. So the compatibility maps, the compatibility charts that you have, they include parks. I believe the parks are part of the, I don't have all of the individual compatibility pages, those charts, but I think the one you have does have parks on it, and it has similar designations. You could place a feature in those in this space today, but it says very clearly that you can't place any type of improvements on the land. It wouldn't be prudent of the city to develop that as park space today, because ultimately you couldn't place any park improvements on it. You might have an area that had some very low trees, because we can't have tall trees in an inter-approach zone, and some grass, and it would be very expensive to maintain, but we couldn't have anything like organized ball fields or baseball fields or playgrounds or any type of intensive active recreation occurring on it. And that's why the city still wouldn't entertain construction of a park in that space. It really is there to protect flights into the airport, and it really isn't appropriate to place any types of intensive activities within that inter-approach zone. Does that answer your question?
It does, and forgive me if I play the devil's advocate here, but I just want to make sure, with this plan or compatibility plan, could that be modified to allow some structure? And don't mean to say it particularly in the city of Madera, but I know other areas might allow closer, where it's closer to the airport runways, and you might see certain structures. So I'm just throwing it out there. I want to make sure.
Well, looking at the compatibility zones, it's possible to have a park closer to the runway, but not in conjunction with it being in the direct paths of flights.
Gotcha.
So you asked the specific question, is it possible to change it? Well, again, that would not be per the authority of the city to do so. And that would be something that perhaps in the future, when the Airport Land Use Commission chooses to update this plan again, they, along with their consultant in the FAA, come to some findings that the allowance for parks in inter-approach zones is now a good thing. But it wouldn't be appropriate for the city to unilaterally make a decision that placing a park in an inter-approach zone would be a good thing.
So what you're saying is that when drones come vertically instead of horizontally, that's when they can update that.
I don't believe I used the word drone in any of my responses, but thank you.
Thank you.
So when it says, Chris, just for clarification, that the ALUC is implemented by the city, that's really as it relates to development. Not necessarily we are the originators, not necessarily that we have ability to modify or change, but when it comes to development, whether it's commercial, industrial, or residential, we must implement this ALUC.
It's part of our analysis as we review individual development projects. Just like we looked at our fire station as a component of development to the east of that runway, or FTS, or as we currently analyze what can or cannot occur in the Village D specific plan area, because there are areas that are still impacted by the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, and no allowances for residential activities can occur there. Those are still things that we must make sure that we address so as to provide consistency with that plan document.
Thank you. And I know this is just a workshop, but I'm sure there's some people here in the audience. I want to give people in the audience a chance to speak. And I know this could be a very touchy subject, so I will certainly listen to anybody that has any questions or concerns. But if we get too far in the weeds, we can certainly have a private meeting with Mr. Boyle if need be. But at this time, I'll ask if there's anybody wishing to come up to the podium, please do so. And you'll have any questions for Mr. Boyle or any one of our staff.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle.
Good evening. My name is Dan Whistler, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm here to discuss some of the things that there's a small working group here that's seated out here. Myself, Don Holly, Jim Shemp, and Bill Hoffridge. Okay, I don't know if you know all of these gentlemen, but I do know them very well. Years of experience. Matter of fact, we totaled up, I think I didn't get an exact total. There's 200 years worth of flight experience here. especially one, is a former FAA employee, FAA the safety officer for the whole United States. This man knows aviation. He knows the FAA. Now, I'm saying that to now, not necessarily challenge, but to explore what's gone on here. There's something in this whole system of the county and the city. Now, remember, I don't know how many was on the city council at that time. 2014, 2015? Is there anybody on the council at that time?
I was, sir.
You and you. There was things going on at that time for the airport land use compatibility plan that Mr. Boyle just talked to you about. Now, I'm going to ask another question, and maybe Mr. Boyle can answer. Where is the airport master plan? The primary document that the city of Madera requires for that airport. And because I just happened to I was on the Airport Advisory Commission at that time. I still have it, 1993. I have found online, be glad to share it. Matter of fact, I've already shared it with the Public Works, the director, as well as Mary Church. So there has been grants to the Madera Airport. I just have one copy, but I'd be glad to leave one, or if you can scan it, well, we can just pass it around. There has been grants to Madera Airport for 2 times, 2005 and 14? I think it's on there. I've got it highlighted. For airport master plans. Nobody, and matter of fact, we had a 3-hour meeting. This is the 4 of us with the Airport Advisory Committee of the City of Madera, and nobody has seen that plan. I've asked the staff to look back in their records and find that airport master plan that the city did, or maybe they've received money. We don't know. We're trying to find it. I appreciate Mary and John's help looking for this. I know what a chore it is to look back on records, but I'm saying there is something not quite right about this whole process. Let me go back to the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. That is a county organization, not the city. It controls the area surrounding the airport. Mr. Boyle mentioned that. But why does that influence the number 8 and 26 runway? That should be in the airport master plan. Now, what I found just in the last couple of days, it's taken me many, many hours to look into in depth, because I did serve on a committee. I'll talk about that in a minute. We looked back to find out what document was provided to the city at that time and as this is another, you get a lot of these terms. It's called an airport layout plan. I'll show you how, well, let me show it on the current plan. I've got it highlighted right here. And if anybody has some visual problems, this is about as difficult to read as you possibly can. Okay, that is in the Airport Land Use Committee, the compatibility plan that the county has done, not the city, unless somehow they got the airport master plan incorporated with the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. That will be something new that I'm not familiar with, and I think we may even have some other people here that have dealt with these agencies. Now, besides that, let me refer to my notes. I should just read this whole thing. I spent a lot of time on it. Well, let me go back one quick stop. 25 years ago, at this very podium, well, maybe not this one, but at one similar to this, we had, the city of Madera had a major developer, local developer, that wanted to build the Madera Meadows subdivision. Does anybody remember the Madera Meadows? I've still got the plans for it. I didn't bring them tonight, but it was north of Cleveland Avenue, south of well, it was south of the airport, but it extended all the way across the airport runway protection zone. I mean, it was a challenging time for the Airport Advisory Commission. And I might say that the Airport Advisory Commission is an important part answering to you, providing excellent information, current information. That whole thing that we went through 25 years ago was a challenge. There was all kinds of some pretty serious problems for the city, for the Airport Advisory Commission, but it was resolved, and consequently we have contracts, agricultural contracts for a lot of that property, and it's working quite well. But now this is, in a sense, another situation, but it's happening all over again. Developers want to put 11,000 homes out on the traffic pattern side of the airport. Okay, now I'm getting a little passionate about this because I've been flying off this airport for almost 50 years, some a little bit longer. Besides the way it was handled, I'm still waiting for information back from the FAA to confirm that we received the grants and if in fact they have documentation to show that. I'm not calling anybody, that is suspicious, but I think it's something we need to look at. I don't know that that is not the normal way in the past. Before, it was done through the Airport Commission, the Airport Advisory Commission. Something changed. Now, I know there's been some changes here in city structure over the last few years. This is going back not just 5 years ago, this is going back 20 plus years ago. If you kind of look at the big picture. There are things that are still bothering a lot of people. As you can see, we've got quite a few pilots that use the Madera Airport. Now, one of the most interesting things right now, there's been talk about closing that ag runway. I like to call it that. It's 8 and 26 or 7 and 25. We've had, and Mr. Boyle has had, a man by the name of Doug Thiel from Chowchilla, who has Thiel Air Care. It's one of the premier aviation agricultural operations in California. They run a very top level ag operation. Who does it support? Obviously, the ag community. What is Madera? What kind of revenue is generated off of the ag products that are produced right here in this county? I've heard from, and you've got somebody from the Farm Bureau here too, I've heard $2 billion. It's a significant part of what goes on here in Madera, and I challenge all of you, including Mr. Boyle, including the manager, and everybody here, to think about the effect of the ag on all of our daily lives. It affects the airport too. That he's wanting to use this only as a staging area. I've talked to him. I've been up to his operation. He's he runs a very top level organization, something we need for the ag community. He can fly out and cover farms here much quicker than he can from Chowchilla. Now, why, I know this phrase is, it was in the master plan to close it at some point. Now, then it showed up on this plan in 2005. I've talked to the Airport Advisory Commission and numerous pilots that did not see this, hadn't even heard about this. Now, there's something about the communication between the city of Madera, the county of Madera, the airport land use compatibility plan. All right, so they put up the little flyer in the paper. How many people actually read the legal notices? I doubt if very many of them do. Okay, so that's the legal notice. They publish it out, I'm sure, out in front here over at the county, at the Board of Supervisors at the county building. What's wrong with making an outreach to people? How many parents, or not parents, how many pilots would show up at that meeting? More than what did. I haven't heard anybody comment on the meetings that were held back in 2015 by the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, except maybe just the members alone. I have not talked to any pilot that said that they've been at that meeting or was even aware of the meeting, or even 5 years later aware of this. something's wrong with the communication here. I'm not pointing fingers, but I'm saying there's something within the system. Let's go back. It's not your not your fault, but let's go back to 2014 or 15. What was going on here? I'm going to leave it up because there's a question that needs to be answered. Now, let's go back to this proposed airport land use, well, the one they're using, the airport land use compatibility plan. First off, I want to see if we have an airport master plan that's been updated since 1993. Okay? I've asked that, and I'm hoping to hear from that as soon as possible. If I don't hear from them, I'm going to find out. I just put a call into the FAA in LA this afternoon. The man's not in the office. As soon as I find out from him, if I can track it down, I will bring that to you. Now, this is getting a little, intense when you have to go that far. I've been retired. I'm trying to enjoy that, but this has really hit a nerve. And I think that there's, between the communication and some of the other things that have gone on by not advising the Airport Advisory Commission or any of the tenants out there, there's a lot of people that have been basing their aircraft out here. They pay taxes on the use of the hangars. They pay taxes to the county for the appraised value of their airplanes. Some of that's supposed to come back to the airport, and Mary did confirm that. I might say that Mary, from what I'm seeing, she's overworked. And I think John probably is concerned about that too. So there are some things that need to be looked at.
Excuse me. Sir, excuse me. I'm going to interrupt you, and I apologize for that. It's me up here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello. I just wanted to request the mayor if I understand this is a workshop, and I just wanted to find out from the mayor if he will be allowing all speakers that are here tonight on all agenda items to speak more than 3 minutes. Just for the record, just to be fair to everybody, or whether you want to go ahead and include some limits.
Actually, I know this is a very touchy subject, and I think Mr. Whistler is speaking for a lot of the people in the audience. And so, and as most people know, I usually don't hold that 3-minute clock anyway. So I do kind of want to get to where we can maybe move a little forward. But again, I know, Mr. Whistler, you represent quite a few people here, and so I don't think they're all going to march up here, although I see Don back there too. We certainly get your point, but I would like to kind of get to a point to address some of the issues regarding the primary runway, if what your opinion is on that to be used. Can we still use this as a staging area? So maybe kind of get to the point to where
Why do we want to close the runway?
Exactly, thank you.
All right. I think it's wrong, number one, especially since the airport has been there a long time with that ag runway as a restricted ag runway. Right. We've got a man that wants to come down here and pay to the airport fees to operate off of that airport. And when there was comment made, well, we can move it over to the main runway, that is not compatible use. Ag uses a different, if they get above 500 feet, they get a nosebleed. All right, now, why don't we keep that open, and we might have to make some adjustments in some way so that the clear zone doesn't go over the fire station and the other industrial things, buildings out there. That would help, because if there's any kind of a spill, any kind of a chemical spill, if it's on the main runway, we've got to close it. If there's an accident on that runway, we've got to close the airport. So these, when they just randomly say that these things, we can do this, sometimes wisdom isn't always in part of this whole picture. Now, I'm not trying to say they're not wise, but sometimes they lose sight of what should be used at the airport, what has been used at the airport, and why do we want to drop it. Sure, it was on the master plan in '93. It was just a casual comment. It wasn't something that was, specific. The new master plan that we had nothing to do with, didn't know anything about, all of a sudden shows up. I want to find out where that airport layout plan came from. Now, in order to make this a little bit shorter, I want to ask for I'd like to have a meeting, especially with the four of us, we've got some real top level thinking on all this. I would like to have at least that. I've got maybe one member of the airport, one or more members of the airport commission could meet with Mr. Mayor or some city council members that you feel you would work out some of the details on this. I would ask, emphatically ask, that we put a lot of this and not bring it to a vote, put this on a hold for right now. I know that the planning and the developer's not gonna like that. I've heard that story before, but we've got to work out some kind of a greater awareness. And when I say we, I'm speaking of the citizens, certainly all of you. I respect the work you're doing. It's a tough job. But this is something that has struck a real nerve. And as you can see, we've got some pilots out there that have a rather strong feeling about all this.
Sure. No,
Do you
Mr.
have any
Whistler,
questions of me?
I appreciate your passion. I really do. And I'm glad you recognize that in the past, it goes back quite a few years, especially with the master plan.
Right.
And that this does not solely rely on the city, per se, but it was the city and the county, and then, of course, you had talked about the Airport Advisory Commission.
Right.
I can't speak to that in the past, but what I would like to offer is exactly that, at least to answer questions, Mr. Whistler, as far as the master plan. I know you had contacted the FAA.
Yes.
But I would really like to form more of a partnership and rather have you feel like you have to go do your own homework. I would love an open door policy here at City Hall to answer questions with you. I would certainly love to be in there if that's what you're asking. And let's make sure that when we move forward, it's not on this contentious platform, but understanding that the city of Madera in their best interest is what we're really looking for.
Well, that's what we're looking for, because
course.
it's been, we have had one of the nicest general aviation airports. It is the only airport of that level in Madera County.
Right.
We have put, already, I know that there's probably an excess of probably $15 to $20 million have been FAA grants for the city of Madera Airport. We've been out there, we've talked to the staff. I think we've got a little direction. It has been neglected for some time. There's all kinds of speculation. I won't go into the details there as to why that happened. Lack of attention or other agendas or whatever, I don't know. But what we need to do is we need to take a positive approach about turning this around now. We don't wait, because already we're behind. This plan that got adopted without too many people knowing about it is out in front of us. We need to catch up and get out in front of it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
I know you have Mr. Boyle's number. If not, he'll share that with you.
We can talk to Mr. Boyle.
We can set up something and, again, continue to move forward, answer questions.
Well, I'd really like to take it to either some council members or even to the city manager.
Sure, I would like the city manager to be in that meeting as well.
Okay.
Sure.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whistler. Dean, before you leave, Councilwoman Gallegos had a question. I'm sorry.
I don't know if this is for Mr. Boyle or Mr. Scarborough. In the 2015, when they acted on this, shutting down the ag runway, it was for the reasons of no more FFA money was coming through to maintain the runway. Is that correct? And so if it was to stay, who's going to fit the bill to maintain it? Is that something that is of great concern?
I can answer that.
Okay, go ahead.
That is directed to him. That runway has not received FAA money in quite some time. It has been just left, that's.
In the microphone, if you don't mind.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
The FAA has not funded money specifically for that for quite some time, because the ag operation does not need the smoothest, longest, widest new runway. All they need is, what they've got right now is fine. I talked to Mr. Thiel just the other day. He said, no, I can operate off of that with no problem at all. I'm not going to build anything. I have to put up some containment areas, some not a building, but just some areas that he can stage and run one or two airplanes off of here during the really busy ag time. So, no, there's been no FAA money spent, as far as I know. And by the way, we wish we had one gentleman here. He was back there. He was our airport supervisor, Sam Scheider. If anybody knows him, He was one of the best airport supervisors we've ever had. We accomplished more with his help than anybody else, and we haven't had one since. So I'm going to talk to the city council about maybe turning things around and getting us a new airport supervisor.
We, as you know, and I know you didn't want to get into the details, we have not had a director of the airport for quite some time.
Yes, and it shows.
And it does. I would agree with you.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Whistler. Appreciate it. Somebody else want to speak? You got 28 seconds, Don.
I would suggest that we postpone this to another meeting.
Well, this is simply a workshop for information, so there's no decision that's going to be made this evening. This was actually because so many people in the community had called, a number of council members and staff. We thought it would be prudent to bring this in an open session as a workshop to basically bring us up to speed, but there won't be any decisions made this evening.
Well, as chairman of the Airport Advisory Commission, I must say one thing, or several things. Somehow or another, the commission has been left out of the loop for years. We talk about the fire station. We were not notified of a fire station in the airport environs or any of this other thing, this whole new big development. I hardly knew anything about it. And as chairman, I should know, and somebody should have told me. And as far as the commission goes, we've been going by the approach zones and everything that were laid out in the, what was it, 93? The 93 master plan that the city did. And I was a part of it and actually drew a lot of the lines on the maps and discovered that some lines that were already there had been moved by the developers. And consequently, the reason some of the shapes of things are different is because stuff was already there. And so why put lines in that can create conflicts later? Because there are a lot of houses were built where they shouldn't have been built. And, but anyway, I'm the only member of the Airport Land Use Commission, the one, the autonomous one, and I'm the only one that voted against it. Because at the time, there was nobody else involved with Madera there. They might have been sitting in the audience, but nobody said anything other than me. And I couldn't get enough people to agree with me because they didn't know a damn thing about an airport. And so I look back on that, and I was also told that what went on this ALUC plan really didn't matter to the city because we had our own plan. And I've been going by it for years. And if you look at it, you'll find that it's more stringent than the county one, or it's not county, but the ALUC one. And the reason that ALUC one came to be is because back at that time, just prior to all that, was when that airplane went into a, what was it, a restaurant and stuff off the end of the runway at the Sacramento Executive Airport. And it raised all kinds of hell through the whole aviation industry and everything, because why was that restaurant allowed to be built right on the end of the runway? And I'm not talking about, you know, a half a mile away or whatever. I'm talking about within, I don't know, 500 or 600 feet. And a lot of things were all going on at the same time at that time that had to do with setting up all this stuff. And I couldn't ever find a line between the city, the county, or whatever. And Mr. Boyle here is bringing up all this stuff. Yeah, it's on the ALUC thing. But at the time, I was told that it didn't mean anything. So I feel like a dummy now.
Not at all. Not at all. And
I spent, hell, what, 30 years of my life on the commission, and for what? And I would like to see that we just postpone this thing where we can sit down and spend a few hours going over everything that's occurred, and I think some of you will be surprised at some of the things that have happened. And like I say, I'm finding out, well, just today I found out some other stuff through Dan that went on that I was told something completely different.
Well, again, tonight, Don, was just a workshop. We're not making any decisions, and history is very, very important. I know you guys have a lot of history, and you've been around for quite a while. That's going to be important, but we'll talk about what we do moving forward.
I can go on for several hours.
Yes, I know. Thank you,
Thank
Don.
you.
Appreciate it.
Good evening. My name is Doug Teal, and Dan, thank you for the kind comments. I'm kind of new on scene in Madera area, and I've been part of our history. I'm in Teal Air Care off of Chowchilla Airport is in its 23rd year, and I've been involved in ag aviation for 42 years, and currently I have my kids are all flying in the business, so we have a lot of interest. I currently sit as chairman of the California Aircraft Association in Sacramento, and we have approximately maybe 90 to 95% participation of the aerial applicator operators in the state, and there's only 56. At our next convention, we already know of 2 of those that have gone out of business, so we're down to 54. In this area, when I started in 1997, I had 7 competitors, meaning Chowchilla, Madera, Fireball, Merced. We're down to 3. And the customer base that I have is expanding. And there are currently growers, especially south of Madera and east of Madera, that are constantly calling us. And I think it's very important to know that this is not the first time agriculture has buried its head in the sand and then peeped up and said, "Oh, now what do we do?" Well, now what do we do? This runway is the last ag runway in that area. It's currently being serviced by the operator that was here. That's a confusing situation and the reason that I kind of got involved in Madera, I approached the city of Madera prior to 2015, and I was just kind of strung along and your insurance requirements were undoable. It's just something that didn't come together. But the current leaser or leasee sold his business without disclosing to the guy that bought it, a grower who wasn't even was a grower. He didn't even fly. He actually took money for it, and I was going to move in, and that's how I became aware of the lease. And then with Mary does a very good job, I might add. But it's very important to note that this is the last runway, and the closure of this runway is going to have very serious consequences to the growers in Madera. And I know Mr. Boyle is real enthused about new jobs, but I don't know, how does that compare to the product that agriculture supplies to the city of Madera? And I want to speak to another thing about the usage of 30 and 12. The city of Chowchilla is in need of refurbishing their runway, and we happen to have the same engineer, which I just learned tonight from talking to Mary, that you guys have. And he tasked me. He needed to know how many operations of our runway that we supplied, because possibly because of the size of our airplanes, it allows for a wider runway. In other words, we can improve our airport. And I was kind of astounded, even at my own numbers, but in 2016 alone, there was 3,800 operations. and operation is a landing and a takeoff. Well, not saying that that's going to be, but that could be the scope. And mixing with the current traffic, the jet traffic, IFR traffic, which we don't mix with in Chowchilla, it's going to complicate things a lot in Madera. And also, I'd like to note too that there was a time recently that the 30 in Madera was closed, and runway 26 and 8 were used as an alternate runway. And I can say another time, it's the only crosswind runway left in the valley. And I've had occasion, ag airplanes get a lot of use, and I've had a rudder brake, and the only way I got it down was your crosswind runway. If I have to land crosswind, I'm cartwheeling down the runway. Chris is fixing it. But anyway, if you have, I'm available, and I have experience I sat on the Chowchilla Airport Advisory Committee for 25 years until there was a city manager there who decided I had a conflict of interest. And I noticed in that 25 years, we didn't really know too much what was going on with ALUC. And that was probably ours, but it wasn't disclosed to us readily.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Teal. I appreciate your comments.
Good evening. My wife gave me permission to be here, so I better speak on a few comments. My name is Nick Davis, and I'm here at the moment wearing the hat of Madera County Farm Bureau President. And I have a list of things I can talk about as far as what this means to the agriculture industry. But we have a significant amount of acres in the Madera County that is primarily perennial crops such as trees and vines. And those crops use aerial applications for plant protection products. And removing this ag strip would definitely impact their ability, especially in years like this year where we have late spring rains, or we have a wet winter, and some of us can't get our equipment into the orchard or vineyard. So it's going to significantly impact our industry, definitely. So let me take off the Farm Bureau hat and put on my Madera Airport Advisory Commission hat. I've been serving with Don Horrell for, I think, 4 years now, and I share everything that he has to say and the rest of us, and it's a confusing thing. I mean, we want to be able to provide you with the best information we possibly can for you to make decisions for the airport usage. And being new, I feel like only in the last few months have I learned the most about the airport and how it operates. But learning about the ALUC and the airport land use compatibility plan and what you can and cannot do, and it just seems like it just kind of got through the cracks, and the Airport Advisory Commission had no idea it happened. And it's disappointing, and pilots are passionate people, and so are farmers. So I'm double passionate about these issues. So I know this is a workshop, and I look forward to hopefully being a part of that conversation down the road.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to take that hat off.
Okay.
Sorry. One last comment. We have a pilot in Madera. He flies out of the Madera airport named Vern Lund, and he can't be here today. But he asked me to read a few things for him. So if you don't mind, I'd like to get through those. And I'll say this in first person, so hopefully I send the messaging correctly. My name is Vern Lund. I have been a pilot continuously over 55 years. I have flown Piper Cubs, most Cessna aircraft, Navy jets, and Boeing 747s. I owned an aircraft maintenance, fuel service, and flight school at the Madera Airport for 19 years. I am here this evening to voice my objections to the planned housing developments to the west and southwest of our municipal airport and the proposed closing of runway 8 and 26. The reason for my objection is primarily a concern for public safety. The vast majority of aircraft crashes occur in the immediate vicinity of airports, and the Madera Airport has not been immune from these occurrences. Back in the 60s, attempting to land in the fog, a man with 3 family members crashed into the agricultural field directly across Road 23 from our airport. All were killed. In 1971, a crop duster hit a power line and crashed in a peach orchard near the intersection of Road 23 and Cleveland Avenue. The plane caught fire and the pilot was killed. In the late 70s, 2 aircraft made forced landings in the same agricultural field just west of Road 23, one due to fuel exhaustion and the other due to engine seizure. No one was injured in either of these incidents. Just recently, 2 men were killed when they crashed their light aircraft in a newly planted fig orchard just off the end of the most commonly used runway 30. There have been other incidences, but these 5 make my point. If developers are allowed, with your blessings, to build family dwellings in these traditionally agricultural fields around our airport, I predict that a bodily injury risk to Madera City residents will increase. This is needless. Also, to the closing of runway 826, in my opinion, this would be an additional safety concern. In 1941, the U.S. Navy built our airport and decided they needed an additional runway for takeoff and landing when crosswinds existed here, and I assume for safety reasons. I personally am glad that they did, because in 1993, while doing a test flight in a Beechcraft for a local shop, directly after takeoff, the engine began running rough and a strong odor of high-octane gasoline filled the cockpit. I turned back toward the airport and landed safely on the closest available runway, runway 8. The possibility of an engine fire increases in direct proportion to how long you fly with a serious fuel leak. Maneuvering back to runway 30 would have taken an additional minute or maybe a lifetime. I was very happy to have runway 8 as an option. There are no geographical or environmental issues to keep Madera from expanding in almost any other direction. And it's not like these lands to the west and south of our airport are not being used. Food grows in these areas. Where to allow city expansion involves the consideration of many factors. In this case, public safety may not be a high priority. Thank you.
Nick, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'll be brief. I'll keep to my 3 minutes. With the proposed 10,000 homes, is that going to be a CFD? Has that been proposed as community facility district tax? Are we going to?
Mr. Montoya, this is a workshop for the airport land use compatibility. It's
Well,
not to talk about
a
village.
10,000 homes. If there's a CFD times $80 a month, that's $800,000 a month. It's very important.
We're talking about the airport. We're not talking about.
Okay, but they're proposed 10,000 homes. Now, if there's 10,000 homes, a CFD, welcome to my world. The city screwed us over.
Mr. Montoya, we are
And
here to
wha-
talk
okay.
about the airport, so I'm
Okay.
going to ask you kindly, sir, since you've already taken your 3 minutes in public comment and you have nothing to add.
The city of
airport land
Madera,
use compatibility.
I'll read this from the grand jury report. The city of Madera shows a lack of
Montoya,
transparency towards the residents of city of Madera and the Madera County as founded in the grand jury report,
You
June
have something
28th.
to add to the airport land use compatibility discussion that we're having here. This is a workshop.
The discussion was a failed attempt to be transparent. Nobody can see anything. We didn't have handouts. Thank you.
I'm sorry you had to hear that. I appreciate the comments from the previous gentleman coming here, and I look forward to discussing with you moving forward. Nick, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Councilman. I'm a resident of Fresno County. I'm a concerned airport user in Madera. I can testify that Mr. Lund's experiences using 8 and 26, it is important for safety. It is the only runway facing into the wind when we get the big crosswinds out of the west. A diminishment of the airport in any way is a diminishment of your community. I host a formation flying clinic every end of April, first weekend of May or whatever. We'll have 75 airplanes come in and been doing it for 10 years. One of the reasons we're here is because if something is to happen on the primary runway 1230, we've got 8 and 26 as a backup to recover these aircraft. My other comment is that it sounds like the ALUCP is being taken in a prescriptive fashion. They have decided that 8 and 26 is closed. I don't think that should be the case. I don't think that it should be the case that stakeholders, anybody who operates off that airport, anyone who has a business connected with it, should be noticed. I work very closely with the ALUC in Fresno. I manage a couple of airports for private airports, and also I'm the de facto airport manager for Sierra Sky Park at Fresno. So I've worked with the ALUC. I'm getting a sense that there isn't the same, and I haven't read the Madera Airport Land Use Commission's mission statement, but yes, public safety is the goal of the ALUC. Well, there's also something in the mission statement there that should speak to protecting the airport from development. And it sounds like in this instance, the developers are pushing the ALUC in this change. And hey, I get it. There's a whole lot bigger tax base in 10,000 homes than there are in the people who use the Madera Municipal Airport. There's no money in the valley that isn't ag. Let's be honest. It all comes from ag. So I'll conclude my comments with thank you for your time and thank you for the workshop environment.
Sure.
And work with these guys. There's some smart guys that want to help.
That's why we're here. Thank you, sir.
Okay, my name is Jerry Holliday. I'm a resident in the city of Madera, born here and lived here all my life. I was appointed to the Airport Advisory Commission by C.C. Gallegos a few months ago. I have been to 2 meetings only, but I would like to bring to you my observation during those 2 meetings, and I'd like to pass these out, one to each councilman. Okay, thank you. I told Cece when I took this position that I would be active, and I think that she can see that tonight. I'm going to make my presentation short. I'm not going to go over some of the same things that's already been gone over, and some of the things that will be said in this meeting that will be following at another time. I would like for you to take a look at those papers in front of you. I'll skip the budget portion of that and go down to the B part, which is operations. These are duties and responsibilities of the Airport Advisory Commission, and I will tell you in advance, I think that we have been neglected. In the short time that I've been there, my observation is we're neglecting fulfilling the duties that we need to be fulfilling. Operations are compiled. We are to compile analytical data and comparative information involving the establishment or modification of airport fees, rates, charges, or fuel prices. Ascertain the type of service to be rendered and keep abreast of development in the aviation industry on all pertinent matters concerning airports, airport law, aviation generally, and based upon the foregoing, review and recommend formal adoption of airport policies. Number C is regarding the master planning. Review the status of the airport master plan and propose periodic revisions thereto reflective of capital expansion projects, possible financing methods, and to federal and state regulations, review and recommend on special permits and proposals as required that deviate from the airport plan development plan. Down to D, land use, review and recommend action regarding land use surrounding the airport as it affects aviation both directly and indirectly. And I'll stop with that. I think that you can see 2 things here. Number one, we have not been doing that. Also, from Mr. Boyle's presentation, we have been circumvented on these issues. We have not been consulted. I was not on the Airport Advisory Commission at that time. I'm simply making an observation of what happened. I'm also stating that that will not be the way it would be done in the future. I believe that the Airport Advisory Committee has enough new people that we can make changes. Also, I don't believe it's been done. Don Whirl can correct me if he's been doing it. On item C, on reports, at least once each year, report activities to the city council and make information available to other commissions and officials of the city as required. I have been in other organizations where I have had to compile those kinds of things. And to me, it's a formal presentation where you would come and keep the council abreast once a year of what has been going on with the commission. And I would hope that we could do that in the future. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate your comments. And to that point, I just want to add, Don has been my appointment for a number of years. And I'll take part or maybe most responsibility for that. I know Don and I speak, I wouldn't say on a regular basis, but I need to do a better job of asking Don to come down and represent as president of the advisory commission, to come down and give us an update. And I can certainly tell you moving forward, regardless of the issue before us, we need to make sure that we're in better connectivity. So thank you, Jerry, for bringing that up.
Excuse me.
I needed to be here from the podium, and Mr. Teal's going to be very, very brief.
Very brief. I have one question for Mr. Boyle, and can you fill in the blanks? In the ALUC plan now, I believe you called it the full throttle plan. The full throttle, it's the current buildings, the project that has started. That's classified D1. Was that correct?
It would be classified. I think for the question, it would be classified as D with the closure of the runway. It's in the C1 zone without the closure of the runway.
It's in the C1 zone without the closure of the runway. What would be the case, where do we go from here? Because you've already started to build that project. If that threshold for runway 26 was moved, and the runway now is 3,700 feet long. You know, Churchill is 3,200. There's a lot of, Sky Park is 2,600, I think it is. If that threshold was moved back, would that preserve and the clear zone is raised because of the further extended displaced threshold? The displaced threshold, does that still preserve your classification of D whatever? And that's my question. His answer is going to conclude me.
Okay.
My answer would be that, first and foremost, I'm not an aeronautics expert. And as it relates to some of the terminology used, I don't have a good background in that terminology. But I think I might have something to add as it relates to that dialogue from my research. Several members that have provided commentary have mentioned an airport, a Madera Municipal Airport Master Plan, which is actually different than the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan that was adopted in 1993. The city did, I'm a hoarder, I'm sorry, but I may be the only person with this plan. Don't ask to borrow it. But this plan was adopted through an FAA grant in 1995 on the heels of the adoption of the 1993 plan. And within this report, which is not an FAA certified report, it's an in-house city plan, and its focus, as noted in your 2015 Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, its focus is centered on airport operations, on-site airport operations. So this plan in 1995 did make a recommendation to shorten the runway, the ag runway. Its recommendation was to shorten it to 3,200 feet. Now, that's all I can really add as relates to the question of the citizen, because I don't have the expertise in terms of how that impacts the various zones at the end of the runway. That would be, and in all honesty, I don't know what process would be required to go and recertify a plan that's 4 years old. But that certainly is something that the Airport Advisory Committee might want to collaborate with the Madera County Airport Land Use Commission in exploring, the potential for that. But that wasn't the shortening of the runway was a recommendation in the 1995 plan that came on the heels of the ALEC plan. In that it's not an FAA certified document. The city could or could not entertain updating the airport master plan as a byproduct of the 2015 document. In this case, we didn't move forward with some city-sponsored airport planning that would take shape as a municipal airport master plan.
Thank you, Chris. And I know your answer can spark 3 more questions. So those were the weeds that I know we can be here for a few more hours. But again, another reason to meet with the county to offer our observation and our history and sit down and address some of these issues that were addressed anywhere from 5 years ago to 25 years ago. Thank you for that answer. I think with that, you got something real short, Don? Very, very short. That's not history, but
I'm just going to say again, let's postpone this to.
Again, as I mentioned, this is just a workshop. Okay. There's nothing. There's no decision to be made this evening.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your input. I thank everybody being down here, and I look forward to sitting down and addressing some of these issues.
I remember now what it was. I approached Dave Tooley about having meetings with the city council and stuff, and he fell on deaf ears. So I figured nobody wanted to hear from me.
Not at all. We love hearing from you.
Well, you weren't here then.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. And from the workshop to the input put in, I think we all learned quite a bit. I know I did about the airport. Moving on to consent calendar. The consent calendar, matters listed under the consent calendar are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion and one vote.
Wait till they clear the room.
There will be no separate discussion of these items. If discussion is desired, a member of the public or a member of the council may request an item to be removed from the consent calendar, and it will be considered separately. I ask at this time, is there anybody from the audience wishing to pull or discuss a consent item? Is there any council member wishing to pull or discuss a consent item? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for the consent calendar.
So move to approve the consent items.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to item C1, consideration of a joint resolution of the City Council of the City of Madera and the Madera Public Financing Authority approving an agreement with Del Rio Advisors LLC for the municipal advisor services related to the financing of energy projects. Ms. O'Hara.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. As you'll recall at our last City Council meeting, NG Corporation came in and did a very detailed presentation of what they're proposing as far as energy saving and solar projects throughout the city. During that discussion, it was determined that we may want to go forward with looking into financing that project, and we feel it's in our best interest to hire a financial advisor to help us do that. Del Rio Advisors, Ken Deeker, has helped us with several projects in the past, the most recent one being the fire station bond sale. And so this is the recommendation that we hire his corporation to handle this and the resulting contract. And he is here this evening with us if anybody has any questions for him.
Thank you very much, Susan. Any questions from council regarding this item or from Mr. Deeker? Anyone from the audience wishing to speak on this particular item? Seeing none, please, Ken, if you have something to add.
Yeah, Ken Deeker with Del Rio Advisors. Thank you for the time tonight. Real quickly, I do know that a lot of these energy projects are supposed to generate savings as compared to the debt service that's proposed. My initial discussions, most of the lenders right now are only going out 15 years, and I believe that the NG projects that were shown in the potential energy savings was based on a 20-year financing. I do have a couple of other possible contacts. So part of the contract is to go out and get fee quotes from both a bond counsel firm who would do the legal work on the financing, but also to secure services of a placement agent. They're like a broker-dealer, and put a term sheet together and get that out to the marketplace so that we can look at the various financing options, including the term of those options. Because clearly it's in the city's best interest to do like 20-year financing that keeps the payments lower and generates energy savings. If the payments are compressed to 15 years, it could have a significant impact on your savings. And so that's what we're trying to do here, is to make this a competitive process, but also try to secure the 20-year financing if it's available.
Great. Great. Makes a lot of sense. Any questions, Mr. Deeker?
Ken, are there more favorable terms, one or the other, with the 15 or 20, as far as rates? Because you said the marketplace, there's not that many banks that are interested in doing the longer terms.
So first of all, we're looking at this as a direct placement, which is a direct, and the city's done a couple of direct placements in the past. That's to a commercial bank that works in the municipal finance business. There are differences in rates. Clearly a 15-year rate would most likely be lower than the 20-year rate, but in this case you're looking at the cash flow generated from the savings of the energy savings from the projects as compared to the debt service on that obligation. Clearly, we'll present as many options as the council would like to see, and you can certainly make that determination based upon the cash flows as to which way the council would like to go. I prefer shorter amortization, but you don't want to increase the burden to the general fund by doing a 15-year amortization when you can generate savings over a 20-year period. That's something that the council would have to set as a policy decision.
But you'll be able to provide us that 15
Yes.
versus a 20 so that we can see what the cost is.
We're going to get proposals back from a number of firms. The other thing that we're attempting to do here, a public offering of bonds, and this is in the $18 to $20 million range, so it's a large project, would require the city to lease essential assets. What we're trying to do here is more like an equipment lease where the actual solar PV facilities are the leased assets. And so that's why the banks are backing off a little bit from the 20-year term back to 15, because they have less security. Because it's the actual panels and stuff that go on the roof of the various buildings and all that stuff. So,
Right. Do we have anything else to put up as collateral?
yeah, the city. I mean, you're building a new fire. I mean, there is.
It seems lately we've been.
But you don't want to use essential assets. That's more for long-term capital projects. The banks will accept this equipment. The question is, how long will they go out for the term of that?
Right. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Councilman.
Would you be able to speak as far as the difference between rates? Like what are we talking about? I mean, can you give me somewhat of an idea?
Well, I can tell you right now that we are at historically low interest rates, and I keep coming to the council as we do these refinancing and so on. It's unbelievable what rates have been doing. But we are at historic lows right now. And I will tell you that you're probably, it's probably 25 basis points or something between a 15 and 20-year amortization. But it's really the principal component of that that causes the higher payments with the compression of the 15 years. So again, we'll present those options to council and let you make an informed decision as to which way you want to go.
Could I ask about when? When can we have that information? And I won't hold you to it, Ken. I
understand. I mean, immediately, if you approve the contract tonight, I'm under obligation to get started, and I will contact the bond counsel firms, contact the placement agents, get fee proposals back, go over that with the city manager, the city attorney, make my recommendations. You'll have to have another council meeting probably in a couple of weeks to maybe approve those contracts, and then we'll put a term sheet together and get that out to the market. So I would say probably within the next 30 to 40 days, we should have something back from the banks to take a look at.
Perfect.
They usually like a couple of weeks once they receive the term sheet to prepare their responses. So it's a bit of a time frame here, and probably a little bit slower than the NG folks would like to do, but I want to make sure we do it right.
Not so much for NG. I think that this project is absolutely fantastic for the city of Madera. So
yes,
sooner the better.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Any further questions of Mr. Deeker?
I did have one last question, Ken, I'm sorry, and this is in relation to the contract. So if you go out to the market, you don't find anything, obviously the city's not responsible for that if we can't find some type of financial bond.
Correct, yeah. My fee is completely contingent. If we can't find a lender or the amortization is too short and the council decides not to go forward, you're not out of pocket anything for me. Or the other members of the team, bond counsel or placement agent for that matter. So it's just like nothing happened. Yeah, I think we'll secure financing. The question is, what term will we get?
Right, that's always the question. Thanks again, Ken, I appreciate it. Thank you for your patience as well. If there's no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
I motion to approve C1 as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve item C1. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Item C2, this is consideration of a resolution approving an agreement for legal services with Montoy Law Corporation. Ms. Silva.
All right, so stay out of my way there. Council is intimately aware of the process we went through, but since this is a public meeting, I prepared a brief review and presentation so we can cover it for the public so everyone knows how we got here. So upon the departure of the former city attorney, council directed staff to conduct searches for both in-house and contract counsel so that it could be evaluated thoroughly by the council which model they wanted to pursue. The city issued a full request for proposals and also opened up a competitive recruitment. We received 6 proposals for contract services, and we received 3 applications for in-house employment. Council reviewed all the proposals and applications, and then in the end, based on that, they interviewed 2 applicants for in-house and 2 for contract firms. And for anyone curious, it just happened to work out that way. We did not seek to end up with 2 and 2. But that's how the pile shuffled out in the end. Council then directed the city manager after these interviews to negotiate an agreement for contract legal services with Hilda Cantu Montoy of the Montoy Law Corporation. So city manager has negotiated that agreement consistent with council's direction. And in that agreement, we have 2 types of services. One is general and one is special. Special will be on the next slide. General is pretty much everything except special. Special is mostly litigation. General is going to be at a bill rate of $230 per hour for attorney, $95 per hour for paralegal. The city will not be charged for travel to city council, successor agency, or planning commission meetings, nor will there be charges for travel for up to 2 staff meetings per month. Any other travel required will be charged at a bill rate of $140 per hour. Special services, as mentioned, mostly litigation related, but if there are administrative hearings or attendance at court for pitches motions, those are motions to review a peace officer personnel file for those that don't know. The bill rate will be $295 per hour for attorneys, and paralegal remains at $95. Travel for special services is billed at $140 per hour. Reimbursable business expenses under the contract, there will be no charges for routine photocopying, mail, and faxes. Actual costs for other extraordinary printing, mailings, couriers, or recordings. Actual costs for consultants or experts, but those must be approved by the city, and there's no charge for mileage on top of the travel time charge, so it's just travel time, not mileage. The term of the agreement, the city may terminate the agreement at any time. The firm may terminate the agreement with 60 days written notice to the city so that we have time to evaluate our options for putting additional counsel in place. I'm sorry, this is not the final version. I think it got moved out of the folder. Hang on, I put it in the folder. This should be the final version then. Shouldn't have gone with the one on the desktop. There we go, financial impact. The current year budget was adopted with no changes from the prior year in the City Attorney's Department. The total 1920 City Attorney Department budget, as adopted, is $430,860. Since beginning contracted legal services in February of this year, we've averaged between the different firms that we've used just over $17,000 per month through June 2019. However, staff does note that this has not included any significant litigation. For example, we have a potential trial coming up late in the fall. That is a lot more dedicated time than review of a file for an hour here or there. But we do not anticipate, based on our experience to date, exceeding the adopted budget that council has. However, we will continue to bring you the monthly reports on the expense of contracted services compared to budgeted funds, so that if things are not working out as expected, council can then give direction or make decisions. Are there any questions on this item?
I just see one correction. And like in the general service, we have in our report that it was $235 an hour, but you reporting here $230.
Well, I was sitting at my desk with the report in front of me, and I could have had a very fat finger. The report is correct.
Okay.
Yes, 235. That was my mistake. Thank you, sir. The agreement and report have 235, so I apologize.
Was that it?
Yeah.
Any further questions? Anyone from the audience wishing to speak on this particular item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for action.
So move to approve C2 as presented.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded to approve item C2. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Hilda.
Yay.
Item C4, this is a public hearing and consideration of a resolution of the City Council of the City of Madera ordering the cost recovery for weed abatement expenses on 7 properties in the form of liens. Lieutenant F. Steves, here, okay. There he is.
Sorry about that. I didn't know that was on delay.
No, it's all right.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. So this is a public hearing giving property owners the opportunity to contest the city efforts to recoup costs during the weed abatement process. In a moment, I'll step back giving that opportunity, but I'll quickly lay the foundation of what we'll be asking tonight. Back in March, we started our weed abatement program where we go around the city looking for fire hazards and tall weeds, and we start noticing property owners, giving them 45 days to clean it up. Once that 45 days passes, we then start preparing council reports to bring it back before council to get council approval to go and abate those properties. We did that in June, got council approval, and at the time we got approval to abate over 20 properties, but by the time we went out to go and actually perform the abatement, there was only 7 properties still in violation. So we performed the abatement on those 7 properties that were still in violation, totaling, $4,331.50, and that's broken down over the 7 different properties. And at the conclusion of this hearing, after considering the public's comment, I would ask that council approve the resolution to apply liens to those properties to recoup those costs. So I'll step back at this time.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant. And actually, in years past, I recognize you, Mr. Councilman. In years past, we've had a whole lot more than this, totaling a whole lot more money. And I think when you gave the report back in June, really the purpose was to educate, and it not necessarily to put a lien, but just to abate, get rid of the weeds so that we don't have that fire hazard during the summer. So I think you guys did a fantastic job in doing so with this little number. But I will ask, there was somebody who spoke earlier during public comment, and I don't see them here in the audience. Did you have a chance to speak with them?
Yes, I spoke to the Lopez's outside and was able to clarify their question. The question they had was, after they received the initial notice, they had the property mowed down in April. But come July, after the additional rains, the weeds had grown back.
Okay.
So as we went back out to re-inspect the property was in violation again, and it was abated on July 15th.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for meeting with them. They didn't have to stay here for 2 hours.
I had some pictures ready for property owners just in case they had any questions, and I was able to show them the pictures and clear up their confusion.
Thank you. I'll get questions from council members, starting with Councilman Hawley.
Yes, Mr. On the Helen Critten's property, did you make contact with anyone?
I did not personally know that.
The reason is, and the reason I brought this up, they're all deceased from in that family, so I don't know approximately who would own that property right now. I know the father's gone, the mother's gone, the brothers are gone, the daughter's gone, so this is the reason I wanted you to check that and see if who would the property we go to in order to keep it updated. But I do know they're all deceased.
Yeah, I don't know how notification was specifically given to them.
So, all right. That's up.
Thank you, Mr. Councilman. Councilman Rodriguez.
Yes, Brian, question for you regarding the couple that was here. You mentioned that back in April they received a notice. They took care of that. Do we send notices after those additional showers that came by and it created the weeds? I mean, or obviously they had taken care of their issue. We had additional rains. Obviously there's weed. Did they receive a second notice or did they receive some type of notice after that?
No, so per the government code, that notice is good for 1 year, basically saying this is the violation, here are the expectations, and here are the potential fines and penalties if you do not stay in compliance with this. That was within that 1 year notice. We kind of, in the past, had we're running on the weed abatement program. It was almost like the city was taking responsibility and managing these properties for a lot of property owners. So we kind of changed the mindset and more sticking to the letter of the law, hoping to put that onus back on the property owners for taking care of their properties, as opposed to we had several citizens, even on a public forum, state that, well, I'll just wait and let the city do it because they're going to go out and get competitive bids and it's going to be cheaper for me anyway. So obviously we don't want that, the city to be in the business of managing property. So I would encourage council to stick to the letter of the law on these issues, and hopefully in a few years down the road, we won't be having so many properties in violation and people taking responsibility.
So then that letter serves for the year, and it's their responsibility as homeowners to come back and, I mean, obviously in their case, did they say they were absent?
Yes. So I spoke to them as well. They live in Fresno.
Okay.
I was wondering if they lived out of the area. They said they lived in Fresno, and I told them who their beat officer was, the code enforcement officer. I said if they were to call up and ask them to swing by their property, we'll go take a look and see if it's in compliance. So if they're out of the area, we'll try to work with them.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Anyone from the audience wishing to speak on this particular item? Did I ask that already? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for action.
To approve item C4?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve item C4 as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Item C5, this is discussion and consideration of administration and operations of the successor agency and successor housing agency with current city staff, hiring of new staff, and/or retention of a consultant. Mr. Rodriguez.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, Arnoldo Rodriguez, City Manager. The item before you this evening is staff's request to receive direction from council on how to best go around or about managing the former redevelopment agency, which is commonly referred to as the successor agency for the city of Madera. Historically, the executive director was a direct report to the agency board, which in this case happens to be the city council, with support staff at the successor agency. They were city staff on loan to the agency. With the redevelopment law changing in 2012, the state of California had mandated that the local redevelopment agencies begin the dissolution process. At the time, the city created the successor agency, and at the same time, the city had also created the successor housing agency. With the sudden departure of the successor agency staff a couple of weeks ago, our city attorney and myself have been, and Claudia have been serving a somewhat ad hoc or an extension of staff for the successor agency in terms of following up, come with people and folks and property owners and just people who have questions. And at this time, we felt that it would be prudent to come to the council to receive direction in terms of how council would like the city to respond. In your staff reports, we had proposed some options, and I use the term some loosely because there are probably lots of different options. This is not an exhaustive list. It's not intended to be one. However, city staff is willing to explore any avenue that the council desires. And a couple of options, I'm just going to run through them very quickly. One option is that the council could direct staff to go through the RFP process to retain a consultant. That consultant can report directly to the city council or the agency board in this case. The council may direct city staff to serve as the lead with existing city staff. And how that looks like, again, it's completely up to the council. The agency and the council can direct staff to lead the successor agency with additional staff, part-time staff potentially. Or at the same time, I apologize for the typo there. I'm just looking at it there on the fourth bullet point. That should say direct staff. I was going
to mention something about that, but I was going to make a joke out of it. So,
yeah.
Hey, man.
Yeah, I'm not too sure what strafe is.
I'm going to assume that was probably at 2 o'clock in the morning you were still working.
Yeah.
And it was.
No, I'm a little embarrassed to say that was earlier today, and I was wide awake.
I gave you an out.
Yeah, thank you. And another potential option is to direct staff to serve as an extension of agency staff with the assistance of a consultant who specializes in such matters. So again, there are a couple of options. One could be existing city staff, bringing on city staff, bringing on a consultant, or bringing on a consultant that reports directly to the council or the agency board versus the city manager. And again, we are completely open to any ideas that the council or that the agency board, in this case, may have. And we are completely open to ideas and direction at this point. You do not have to make a decision right now. However, with that being said, if you want staff to explore a couple of different options, we can go back, we can take a look at those options, and we can always come back to the council for further direction. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the council.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Councilman Hawley has a question.
Yes. Mr. Rodriguez, are we going to eliminate this successor agency at a short period of time?
So the long-term goal of the 2012 state law mandate was to dissolve redevelopment agencies. So at some time, the goal is to eliminate the successor agency. I cannot tell you with absolute confidence exactly when that's going to occur because I'm not familiar with the status of the different projects that were happening at the successor agency. And so once we receive direction, we can start to open up the books. We can start seeing what's on the books in terms of projects and their status. And at that point, we would come back to the council or the agency board where we would advise you some potential timelines. I think it would be premature and I think it would be inappropriate for me to speculate exactly the amount of work that it's going to take because quite frankly, I'm not too sure if anyone on city staff can tell you what that is at this point.
That's a good point because that's really our purpose is the disillusion of redevelopment. If this was ongoing, if this was 10 years ago, my recommendation may be something different, not only to have a consultant to teach us, but to help us grow. In this particular case, our goal is to dissolve RDA.
Correct.
And so with the staff that we have now that have quite a bit on their plate and quite a bit on their shoulders and are doing a fantastic job, this is just one more item where I think that it would behoove us to go outside and hire somebody who knows about disillusion, maybe not necessarily the nuts and bolts of RDA, but more so there has to be somebody that understands disillusion throughout the state of California and help us get to that point. That was kind of my recommendation and suggestion years ago that it fall under the city manager's department, but not necessarily the city manager doing the day-to-day. So it would be my recommendation through you, Mr. Rodriguez, finding that consultant to help the city of Madera dissolve RDA, and that rather than report back to council, they would report and work directly with you and your team, of course, and then you would report back to council. I think that would be money well spent. I think it would be the most efficient and would help us get closer to the dissolution of RDA. That's just my suggestion. And I'm sorry, with that, Councilman Garcia had a question.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask for, and thank you for that. That was pretty good. Do you have an alternative recommendation for us to that as to the consultant? Were you thinking in another direction? I mean,
No, staff is completely open in terms of taking direction from council. If council would direct staff to identify a consultant, and then can we bring on either a consultant or a firm to work directly with city staff? We're completely open to that, and it's really the prerogative of the council this evening. And we're completely open to that, knowing that the end goal is to dissolve the RDA.
Takes us in a whole different direction from what we had before, so.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Councilman Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Medellin. Just wanted to clarify your suggestion in regards to retaining a consultant. There are two options there. One where the city staff would continue to lead the successor agency with the assistance of a consultant, or would we then direct city manager to retain a consultant to do it and phase that out? So I wasn't sure what option you were heading to. Was it the last option there?
It was the last option.
Okay.
But again, it says the city manager to lead, but it's my assumption that Mr. Rodriguez would also lean on his team in certain areas of finance, so that's why I threw that in there, that this wouldn't solely rest on him. I'm sure he's going to rely on some of his team. But that's who he needs to use would certainly be on his department and him himself. But as far as what's written here, it was the last option is what I was looking at.
So, and that being the case, and I too would feel comfortable that we give direction to our city manager to continue to lead the successor agency with the assistance of a consultant.
Great. Mayor Pro Tem Montes.
So that means no additional staff, like part-time staff? Because one of the themes that I kept hearing, and I have been hearing for a while, is that we have good staff, but they're overworked. I mean, I think that was mentioned like 5 times here. So, I mean, do we have anybody? I mean, I know it's next person up, but do we have people that would support staff, I'm saying, that aren't doing 18 other things?
The quick response is probably not off the top of my head. However, I think if we were to go with the 4th bullet point, what we would do is identify an expert, or it's either an expert or a team of experts or a firm that specializes, that we would be working with their legal counsel, with our legal counsel, that specialize. With that being said, I'm confident that the finance department is going to be heavily involved. We have our acting city clerk, Claudia, who was formerly at the RDA, that I'm quite confident that's going to be assisting us in terms of locating files, both hard copy and electronic files. I think the 4th bullet point would be bringing on not staff, but bringing on a firm or consulting agency or a person to assist us just trying to move it forward. I'm not just sure exactly what that looks like if they come in for 4 hours a day for a month, and then after that it's 4 hours every other day if they have an office, or if it's all electronic. Those are things logistically kind of we can figure out after we've identified the firm or the person that specializes. It's somewhat of a niche field, and a lot of people that were in that field have slowly gone away, and they found work in other fields because a lot of agencies have slowly been dissolving quite some time ago. I'm quite confident that we can find that 1 or 2 people or team to help us through this process. If that's the route, I would envision that most of the work is going to land on their lap, and I would try to mitigate as much as we possibly can, having the existing staff do some of the work, besides pinch hitting in certain roles.
Which was kind of my point. Thank you for bringing that up. I know our previous finance director had some knowledge and worked with Mr. Wilson on some items. Of course, you had mentioned Claudia, who has a little bit of experience and has worked directly with Bob in that department. So I think just to that capacity of shedding the light on some of our history, but not necessarily putting the burden of disillusion on our existing employees.
Correct.
Anyone from the audience wishing to speak on this particular item? Seeing none, if there's no further questions, I'll bring it back to council for direction.
Well, I mean, I think
You
we
want
have the direction,
in the
right?
form
So-
of, do you want a form of a motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, I move to approve item C5 with us directing staff to lead the successor agency with the assistance of a consultant or firm who specializes in such matters.
Second.
When you say staff, you mean the city manager?
City manager
Okay.
and staff, if you like me to
Got
add
it.
that.
More staff,
Nice draft. It's been properly moved and seconded with direction given. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much for that. We are on item C6. This is consideration of a resolution approving financing conveyance for Habitat for Humanity in accordance with Section 414 of the Disposition and Development Agreement for 307, 209, 311, 313, and 315 Malone Street in Madera.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is my first item as your staff person for the Successor Agency. And so, can this item before you this evening? It's a DDA for 5 parcels on Malone Street that the Successor Agency had previously entered into with Habitat for Humanity. As part of the agreement stipulated that prior to them seeking funding to develop the project, they would have to come back before the agency board and obtain written approval. In order to do that, the trigger point is Habitat for Humanity would submit a formal request with the city requesting authorization to seek funding. They have done that, and in order for us to provide them with written authorization, we are coming before the agency board to seek approval of that. So this would be for 5 single-family homes. This would be on the east side of Madera. The red dot there is Washington and Malone Street. So to give you a perspective, that's Highway 145, also known as Yosemite, and then you have Vineyard Avenue right here. Here's MLK School, and here's a zoomed in. So the parcels are currently vacant. They've been cleared. If you go on Google Earth, those parcels have a handful of structures on them. They've since been cleared. So again, those are the 5 parcels. This is a more recent aerial photo, and it's roughly the I would probably refer to it as the southeast quadrant, but the roads are angled.
I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez. Councilman Hawley has a question.
Yes, Councilmember Hawley.
Yes, I think there's a correction need to be made for his parcels. You have 307, 209, 311, 313, 315. Shouldn't that be 309?
Yeah, I believe so.
You know, on the agreement, it was 209, so I was just copying, but I'll confirm kind of those are the parcels. But they're definitely on that corner.
That won't fit in there.
No, right. So those are definitely the parcels, though.
The DDA has 307, 309, 311, 313, and 315.
Okay. So that's 2 typos in one evening. I'm not doing too well this evening.
You have an 0-2 count, but you're still up to bat.
Still up to bat.
I am for a little bit longer, hopefully. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Mark the day.
This is not going to go very well in the morning, by the way, because it's usually me giving it to them now.
It lets them know that you're almost perfect.
Yeah. And so with that being said, staff is recommending that the agency board this evening grant authorization for the Habitat for Humanity to seek authorization for funding to develop the project.
Absolute awesome project. Thank you for bringing this forward. Any questions from council? Anyone in the audience wishing to speak on this item, please come forward. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for action.
I so move to approve C6 in correction with the 209 to be 309 as presented.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded with one small correction. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much for that. Item C7, this is consideration of a resolution authorizing the submission of an application in the amount of $31,223 to the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program, fiscal year 2019, local solicitation. Ms. Yareta.
Good evening, Mayor Medillin and council members. I will have no typos because I don't have a PowerPoint presentation this evening.
None that we can see anyway.
But I do believe I'm the last item on the agenda. There's always a little pressure to be brief and efficient when you're the last one and try to get us to the end of the meeting. So I will do my best. However, there is information that I want to share for your benefit, also for the public and for the record. So bear with me. Essentially, the objective is to gain authorization from council to allow staff on behalf of the police department to submit an application to the Justice Department, and also to give an opportunity to the public to comment on the intent of the application. So this is an application in the amount of $31,223 that we want to submit to the Department of Justice, particularly the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Program, which is a primary provider of federal criminal justice funding to states and units of local government. It isn't much, $31,000 from the federal government for local police departments. That just tells me that the federal government places the burden of funding on municipalities to run their police departments on local and state agencies. So nevertheless, we want to request authorization to submit this application because it will offset some of the police department's expenditures. Generally, the permissible uses of the JAG program are for law enforcement programs, prosecution and court programs, prevention and education programs, corrections and community correction programs, drug treatments and enforcement programs, planning, evaluation, and technology improvement programs, mental health programs. So it's pretty broad with some limitations. It doesn't allow for luxury items. But I was perusing through the application late this afternoon, and the police chief is going to be pleased to hear that it does allow police cruisers, police boats, police helicopters. Those are allowable under this funding source. One requirement of the application, as mentioned, is that council approve the resolution authorizing submittal of the application and execution of the required certifications and assurances, but also that the public be allowed an opportunity to comment on the intent of the application. The intended purpose of the funding is to use this allocation for expenditures associated with the police department's in-car cameras, body-worn cameras, and other information technology equipment that enhance the police department's capacity to address and or prevent crime. Staff recommends that you allow the public to comment on this proposal and that council authorize submittal of the application by or before the due date of August 23rd. I will say that the release for funding only happened on the 25th of July, and the application is requested by the 23rd. So the Department of Justice didn't give us even a month to collect public comment, but we will collect it. It allows for us to make a modification even after submitting an application. So we'll definitely, the recommendation is that we offer at least 30 days for public comment. So with that, I will answer any questions council may have.
Thank you, Yvette. Any questions of Yvette? Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Montes.
So is there still a possibility of Chief getting a riverboat?
I shouldn't have said that, right? I shouldn't.
Thank you.
So, big fan on the back? Yeah. Oh, yeah, that'd be cool. That'd be really cool. Sorry, I know. If there's no further questions, I will ask if there's anyone in the public wishing to speak on this particular item. Please come forward. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for action.
Mr. Mayor, move to approve item C7 as presented because it had no typos.
Second.
Awesome. Awesome. It's been properly moved and seconded to approve item C7. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much for that. So I will move on to council reports, starting with Councilman Robinson.
Good evening. I attended the Madera Chamber of Commerce on August 15, honoring Madera finest at the Lifetime Achievement Awards. And also for the first time, they recognized emerging leaders, 4 individuals under 40 years of age. So I represented the city there.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Councilman. Councilwoman Gallegos.
Nothing to report.
Councilman Garcia.
Nothing, thank you.
Councilman Hawley.
Nothing to report.
Councilman Rodriguez.
Nothing to report.
And Mayor Pro Tem Montes.
I got one quick thing. I wanted, this is a question for our manager. I know we had a pretty good workshop today, and I wanted to request the possibility of another one, if it isn't already on the in queue, a workshop on, let me see, the Amtrak station.
Yes, so that is on queue. Let me reach out to Dan Levitt of Amtrak, and we will see when he's available to come. My goal was to have that sooner rather than later. So as soon as he's available to join us, I'll definitely be scheduling that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and actually, that's a perfect segue. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. We still have quite a few workshops to conduct here at the city, and I'm not even sure where we are on the list, but there's quite a few, and they're all important because they're, as this evening showed, this was just an airport workshop, but there's a lot of people in the community, for whatever reason, have a lot of input. So it's not necessarily for the benefit of just the council, but for our community as well. And for some of those council members, or all of us, that maybe were not here in 1993 when a certain plan were done, or in 2006. So they're all very important, and I don't want to remove any of them from the list. But what I do want to ask my colleagues is that we prioritize on where we want to go with these workshops. For instance, although they're informational and it kind of brings a lot of us up to speed on where we are and decisions made, there are some cases, like with the airport, that were decisions made that are beyond our control. There's decisions that were made by the SJJPA regarding Amtrak. We should have input, we should have information, and we should have a workshop, don't get me wrong, but with our budget being passed recently, $51,000 in the black, I think we can all agree that we need to improve that. And as we talk about the Westbury Bridge, as we talk about lack of sidewalks and potholes, the only way we're going to get there, the only way we're going to improve our community is if we have a serious discussion about development impact fees. To me, everything revolves around the development impact fees. It's development, whether it's around the airport, whether it's in Home Ranch, or the east side, or new schools. If we don't have something in place, if we don't address the development impact fees with the discussion of the thousands of homes potentially, not only on paper, but Mr. Boyle, you'll agree that we're moving forward with quite a few residential permits, with a lot more on the horizon. We have some great businesses coming to Madera. And I truly feel that as every month that goes by that we do not address the impact fees, we are losing a lot of money. A lot of money. The money that we could be spending on the things that we want to spend on as a council, whether it's Rotary Park or whatever else. I think that I know that we were ridiculed for our salaries and we were ridiculed for our water rates, but nobody's come screaming in here and said your diff is too low. And quite frankly, that's where a lot of our money comes from. So I implore this council, with all of the workshops we have going on, that we make a priority the development impact fees. That's what I'm asking this evening, that we put that at the top of the list. That we do not continue to just have information to bring us up to speed and kick this can down the road. As was mentioned, we paid Ron Manfredi a lot of money to give us a lot of information, and he said it more than once about our impact fees. And he suggested more than once that we need to address these fees. And so with that governance workshop and his suggestion, and in my opinion, whether they're too high or too low is not the decision I want to make this evening. I just want to make it a priority. And I'm asking this council if we can make the impact fees the next workshop moving forward. That's going to set the tone for our budget for this upcoming year. I feel that we're behind already. We should have done this in the spring. We had a lot of workshops on budget. That takes precedent. I get it. But having pavement management workshops and things of that nature, again, albeit important, I cannot see that being more important than our diff. So I'm going to ask Mr. Rodriguez that if council agrees that we make that our #1 priority. Do I have any input or suggestion from council?
I do, sir. I'm in agreement with you that we should have had this discussion before. I've asked for it since I got on this council. We do need to update that.
Absolutely.
I totally agree.
Thank you. Do I have a census from the rest of the council?
Can we take
I
any
don't
action
think
on
you can take action because saying that it's your priority would be taking action.
I
think
understand.
you have three people that feel that way, and the manager knows that. So he can proceed based on that, or he can bring in back an agenda item with a list of potential workshops, and then you can prioritize in a public meeting.
Well, thank you, Hilda. In all fairness, that's really what I'm trying to do is rather than be pulled in 7 different directions, I want to be fair to our city manager and staff, and that where we will all agree there's important issues, but let's also all agree that we need to prioritize those issues. And if direction comes from a majority of us this evening, basically just direction that we can nod our head and agree, I think that helps. I understand, you're shaking your head. But I was just trying to assist our city manager and team in that the majority agrees that this should be at the top of the list. That's what I was, if not, then we can move forward with something else. I think it should be that census or agreement by council rather than just continually throw out workshops and put that difficult burden to bring everything to council. Councilman Rodriguez.
So, I know that, I'm not sure if we can give direction, but it's a suggested future agenda item. And Hilda, maybe you can help me with this, but on our agenda, is there a way that we can add that as an item to our agendas? So that instead of reports, we can probably combine reports and/or suggested future agenda items from council.
Yes, a number of clients that I have in many other cities have an item called future items to be added to the agenda.
And because this is not an agenda item, I just would suggest that as a future agenda.
Yes.
Bring that back so that we can openly discuss that and then have these priorities being brought back to our city manager as direction.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I appreciate that. I actually thought under approval of the agenda may or may not be the prudent area, but obviously I didn't go there, and I waited for the end, and I got kicked in the shins again. So thank you, Hilda. Welcome to the team, by the way. And with that, that is all I have for my report. So I will ask for an announcement from our city attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. And under Section G of the agenda, G2 is conference with labor negotiators pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6. Agency designated representatives Arnoldo Rodriguez, Wendy Silva, and Shea Johnson. Organizations, General Bargaining Unit, Madera POA, Mid-Management Employee Group, and Law Enforcement Mid-Management Group.
Thank you very much. And for those who stuck around, thank you. Betty, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here. Whenever you're ready.
Put your name on it. Get a sticker. Put it on. It's one of those new stickers. You can put it on the back too.
Yeah, we're on.
Sticker? Put it on the back.
The city council met in closed session for the items in the closed session agenda. All members were present. There is no reportable action.
Thank you very much. And with that, meeting adjourned.
So all of you don't look for me next week.